Welcome to What to Do When, a podcast from real lawyers with real perspective, where we explore a variety of legal issues and scenarios. Each week, we focus on a new topic and discuss what to do when and if any of these legal scenarios ever happen to you or a loved one. With over 40 years of combined legal experience, our hosts offer their unique perspectives and insights on a range of real-life legal situations.
All right, we ready?
Russ, how long have you been in practice?
I've been in practice for 32 years now.
And primarily, what area of the law have you focused?
It's in exclusively criminal law. I toyed with some other areas for a couple of months, but it's been pretty much all criminal law. Started out as a prosecutor for almost 15 years. Did a little bit of time at the Virginia Attorney General's office. And then 2004, I became a defense attorney. I've been doing nothing but that ever since.
Have you seen a lot of changes since you've been a defense attorney?
Well, that is an interesting thing to say, because when I started, it was 1989, and it seems like the criminal justice system often moves in waves. At that time, the system was rather gentle towards those accused of crimes. But then in the 90s, both federally and at the state level, it became more harsh. And, sentencing issues were changed, more mandatory minimum sentences, more aggressive law enforcement, frankly. Now, I will say, we seem to be getting to the stage where that's kind of turning back the other way again, and there's more of a focus on treatment and rehabilitation rather than just locking people up for extended periods of time.
And have you seen interactions with the police change over time with your clients specifically?
Whether the actual interactions are changing, it is hard to say, but I do think the public perception of people's interactions with police is definitely changing. There are a lot more people now who do not trust the police. They question, what the police do. They challenge actions that the police take. Whether or not that's justified is going to be depending on, particular facts of a particular case. But I do think there is more skepticism of law enforcement today than there was, say, 20 years ago.
Well, and right now we've got a big national news case about this missing woman, Gabby Petito, and now also her missing former fiance. And we've been talking about this around the office quite a bit, and both of you feel free to talk about it, but this guy disappeared. Where did he go? He didn't say a word, and I've heard every major news outlet say for sure he's guilty because he's not talking. Right. How do you respond to that? Right.
Well, people, it's sort of a natural human assumption for people to make. If somebody is accused of something and they don't say a word, or they hide, they refuse to talk about it, the natural assumption is going to be, well, they've got something to hide. But I don't think that's always the case. Sometimes people don't talk because they've got a variety of other reasons and could be completely innocent. So I think the assumption people make is probably an incorrect one. But it certainly is a normal human thing to say, well, why won't you talk about this if you're innocent?
Yeah, I think quite often, again, we don't understand the Constitution and how it works.
Right.
And I think so many people think it's our obligation just to talk to the police because they want to talk to us. And quite frankly, that's not our obligation. And the reason that's important is maybe not in this particular case that everybody's worried about, but in our general lives and in protecting our rights and our Constitution, those things become very important. Would you agree?
Right, I absolutely would agree. And that's sort of the starting point for any discussion about that, is for people to understand what is the law. And you hear it on television, movies all the time, your Miranda rights, your right to remain silent, your right to have an attorney. That comes from the Constitution. And you have that absolute right to do those things, but people don't always feel comfortable exercising those rights.
Well, I'll throw some things out that I think about all the time. Like, we see it all the time, like a reckless driving, for instance. Right. You had an accident 2 blocks down the street, nobody was there, the cop shows up, and are you obligated to tell him what happened?
You are not. You're not obligated to say anything to the police. But the normal human desire is, I want to explain how this wasn't my fault.
Yeah. And we know that, like, in those situations, they often write reckless driving tickets. And one of the things we've discussed at the office with Jackie is sometimes, and maybe you'll agree with this, sometimes you kind of have to pay what I consider a little bit of penalty up front. They may want to arrest you, they may want to do certain things to you, but still, your obligation to talk doesn't ever kick in. You never have to prove their case for them. And a matter of fact, as you well know, being a prosecutor, former prosecutor, I dabbled in it too when I first started. It's really hard to prove a case without the person in the accident talking, without.
Right.
Then we'll go back to Gabby Petito. So.
Right. No, you're absolutely right. It is often, that's the only reason the police are going to be talking to you, is to try to build the case and make their case stronger.
So you mean they're not going to try to talk to you just to hear your side of the story?
Well, they will tell you that. That's a regular line that I hear all the time when I'm watching body wire camera footage or interrogation footage, things where the police are talking to you. They will say things of the nature of, look, we already know what happened. We just want you to tell us about it so that we can get your side of it, so that we can help you out. It's never going to help you out. If they're trying to get statements from you, it's not going to help you out. And what you were just saying a minute ago is 100% correct, in that if they've made the decision to arrest you, they're going to arrest you. You cannot talk your way out of it. You will not be able to talk your way out of it.
Even when they tell you that if you just talk to them, maybe they won't arrest you.
Right. They want you to think that way, but the reason is because they are trying to get you to make statements that can then be used against you. And that's why the Miranda rights say can and will be used against you in a court of law, because that's what's going to happen. So,
well, you raised a good
mind.
point, Russ. You said they're going to tell you that, but it's probably not true. And that sort of opens this whole can of worms. Are police officers, investigators, detectives, are they allowed to misrepresent the truth or to lie to a potential defendant?
They are, to a very large degree. It's not a 100% degree. There are some cases out there that they're not allowed to appeal to your sympathies. I'm trying to remember the name of the case from law school they talked about, but where they basically said, if you talk to us because we're trying to save somebody from dying, but if they just tell you that we've got 4 witnesses who have said that we saw you do this, so we know you did it, so why don't you just go ahead and come clean now? It is entirely legal for them to have absolutely no witnesses. In other words, they can lie and say, we've got people that saw you do this, when in fact they do not have anybody that saw you do this.
And I don't think Russ and I are either one are saying this is inherently every police officer's way of doing things, for sure. But, this is a normal tactic. And it's like, when you catch, somebody broke the pot at your house, your dad, and the flower pot's broken, you say, all right, who did it? And you got 3 kids, and every one of them says, I didn't do it. And, sometimes we as parents go, Johnny, I know you did it because Billy told me you did it. Trying to get some kind of truth. Right. So I don't want to villainize every cop, because I don't think that's okay. But I think it's so important that we understand their game, and their job is to get to a conclusion and close a case. So when some incident happens, their job is to do the best their job is to close that case and try their best to find out what happened. But that's quite often impossible without your statement closing the door.
Right. No, that's absolutely true. And I don't want to come across as trying to villainize the police either. That's what their job is. They are supposed to investigate this alleged criminal offense, and part of that investigation is to get you to talk about some things. So the fact of the matter is, they're doing their job. It's not that they're trying to be bad human beings. It's they're trying to be good police officers.
Let's go back to Gabby, because I got a couple questions for you. Because I think Jackie and I have been beating this horse a lot, because it's just so interesting. Like today on the way in, I was listening to Fox News, but if you go Fox, CBS, NBC, CNN, any of them, they're all saying, he must be guilty because of these actions. Right. But so let's put you're what's the guy's name? Sorry, I know it's Gabby. Laundry.
Yeah.
So Laundry's parents give you a call 2 days, say, hey, we don't know what happened. My son came home. I know what I would tell them. Well, what would you tell him?
My absolute advice to them would be that he needs to keep his mouth shut and say absolutely nothing to the police.
Well, and here's the other thing. they're really victimizing the parents right now, saying because they haven't had their sympathy.
Right.
And my instruction would also be to the parents: don't you say anything either.
Right.
I had a case the other day, and a while back actually, but where it was a husband and wife, and the husband's they're doing this. It's all on the body cam, and the husband's basically throwing the wife under the bus in a situation that really didn't need to happen, and I don't think there was a fault. And matter of fact, the case was dismissed. But I was just amazed at the other parties talking how that was making her look horrific. And so often, again, your parental nature is to try to get your kid out of it or try to help them or do something like that. Right. And in that process, you may be throwing your kid under the bus.
Exactly.
And then backing back over him and then backing back over him again.
Right.
So
right. And that's a good way to put it. And it's all well-intentioned. You're trying to help, but it's in that context, you are not helping.
So let's just do a quick fact scenario. I listen to a lot of podcasts, and one of them I'm listening to right now is a whodunit. And this is this long series about investigations and interrogations, and they're talking to some of the characters, if you will, the cast of characters, sometimes weeks or months after this incident. This happens to be a murder case. And they're asking some of these characters, well, when you left the party, did you make any phone calls? Did you text anyone? And these people are seemingly trying to answer what I would consider innocuous or inconsequential questions. What is the problem with answering questions like that?
Well, because you don't know at that stage how innocuous it actually is. It might turn out to be innocuous and not hurt at all. But one of the common tactics later on at trial that will be used is to say this person made inconsistent statements. And the more times you talk, the more likely you are to make an inconsistent statement, even if it's a relatively innocuous one. You might say, yes, I made 3 phone calls. Well, then later on they check the phone records and see, no, you only made 2. And at trial, they will say, well, you told the police you made 3 phone calls, but you only made 2. Making it look like you were lying about it when in fact you were just mistaken.
And that's a lot of criminal law when you see these appeals, and after years and years of somebody being incarcerated and they do a DNA test, they figure out it wasn't him after all. A lot of that happened because he was either trying to tell the truth without an attorney, and he said he was at JoJo's house and it really was at Steve's house, and so they paint him as a liar. Right. And then in front of the jury, he looks like he's being untruthful and hiding something. And we have this propensity to think, why would he be lying? Why wouldn't he tell where he's at? Right. But the real reality is, if I ask you today, Russ, what were you doing on September 3rd?
Right.
You're like, what? I have no idea. Let me look at my calendar. Maybe that'll jog my memory.
But there's the normal human desire to be helpful. Yes. You asked me that question, so I want to give you an answer, even though I don't really know what the answer is.
Yeah.
It's just, that's the way people are.
Back to Petito, one of the things I thought about is, again, we're looking at facts, and what we have now doesn't look good. But there's a bunch of scenarios that could have happened here, correct?
There are. I have to be honest, as a human being, I'm thinking to myself, the more I hear, there's fewer scenarios that look good.
Yeah, I agree.
That's a reality. I mean, yeah. I'm not trying to snowball anybody on that. But, I know initially when we just knew that she was missing and we knew that he wasn't talking, I remember letting scenarios roll through my head that, well, maybe she hurt herself after having an argument with him. Maybe there's something along those lines where he just feels like he might have done something wrong, but in reality, he didn't do anything wrong. But he can't make that decision until he sits down with a lawyer and they analyze everything and decide, well, yeah, you didn't actually do anything wrong here. And that's why I would always encourage anybody to talk to a lawyer before you do that, because you may end up talking to the police. I've done that with clients. I've had clients come to me and they say, should I talk to the police? And I say, well, calm down, let me find out as much as I can about it, and then we will make an intelligent, informed decision as to whether to talk to the police. And sometimes that decision is, we do go talk to the police. And sometimes the decision is, no, we do not. But you want that decision to be informed before you make it.
Yeah. I kept thinking at the beginning too, and I agree with you, as time goes on and you hear about how this couple was constantly fighting, it was interesting initially. They kind of made it sound like it was both fighting and that she had blown up to the point where the police had been called on her. So I'm thinking this is a pretty volatile relationship. What if they're behind the van, she attacks him physically, and he just shields himself? That we see so many assaults and batteries where he sticks up his hands like, you're not coming at me. And she falls over, hits her head on a rock, and he thinks, "Oh my God, I just killed somebody."
They're going to hang me for this.
They're going to hang me. I'm running. And those are very real scenarios we see every day, where there's real no culpability other than defending yourself and trying to stop a bad situation, and all of a sudden it turns into a very, very bad situation on yours. And the worst thing you could do at that point is talk to the police, because you're going to sound you're already guilty inside. Because the fact of the matter is, if you hurt somebody else, most people who aren't criminals and aren't bad people feel bad about that. Even if it's not intentional, they still feel bad. And that's why car accidents and all those things are the same way. When you wreck into somebody, you feel bad about, I'm so sorry I hit you.
I'm so sorry I hit you. And then you've made a statement that could be used against you in a civil suit.
So really, really important to understand why the Constitution is there. I mean, we have the best Constitution in the world, whether anybody likes that or not, and people fuss about how this country is so bad. But man, when you go to other countries, you're basically guilty until proven innocent. Here, we have this statement that, hey, you're innocent, and you don't have to prove you're innocent. They have to prove that you're actually guilty. And talking most of the time only proves.
Yeah. And actually, you sort of alluded to it earlier on when you said something about, I don't remember exactly how you phrased it, but people need to remember, winning that initial battle with the police at the time of making statements or not making statements isn't the ultimate goal. The ultimate goal is to win the war, which is to be found not guilty or to not ever get charged with a crime. If you're in that initial stage of an offense, the whole investigation and prosecution could take 6 months, could take a year. You might, think you're scoring some points by refusing to talk to the police or by trying to convince the police by talking to them that something else happened than actually happened. You might win that war for a day or two, but then you've just made statements that are gonna sink you down the road. So you got to think long game. I want to make sure I walk out of this okay. And the best way to do that is by not giving them any more information than they have until you've got proper legal counsel.
Well, a lot of people believe that if they believe the police when they say, if you don't talk to us, we're going to put you in jail. And that's just what people believe. They've seen it on TV. They've heard people talk about it. So most people don't want to go to jail. They don't want for any length of time, especially if they're innocent.
I would say in most instances, if the officer is saying to you, if you don't talk to me, you're going to go to jail, then you're going to jail regardless. They're going to put you in jail. They're just trying to get you to say more things that they can keep you in jail longer.
I agree 100%. I think so often and Russ said this, and I don't want to beat this dead horse, but you got to understand what's going on here. And, it's like a DUI on the side of the road. You get pulled over. You're under no obligation to say you're drunk, to do their test, to do their field sobriety thing. Are you going to get locked up? Probably. But the time and the space and all the things that happen in between that and the beginning and the end might be your very salvation, where you think that just talking, run your mouth, or I can do this test, I'm physically strong. I don't know. Sometimes I think all the time, like, say your ABC's backwards. I'm like, can I do that right now? Sitting here, And so often you feel like, well, I know I'm not drunk. I'm just going to do this. And so you fail all these side with the road test, or even you fail one. That gives them probable cause to take the next step.
Right.
So often we're giving them, and I'll let Russ explain what probable cause is, but the officers have to have some probable cause.
Absolutely.
And explain that.
And probable cause, everybody has heard that in a criminal case, to convict somebody, they need evidence that proves guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. Okay? Probable cause is a much lower standard. It's basically, is it reasonable to believe that a crime was committed, and is it reasonable to believe that this person committed that crime? That's probable cause. That doesn't mean you're guilty. A probable cause finding doesn't mean you're guilty. It doesn't even go on your record. But if a charge is placed, it has to be based on probable cause. And then the whole process begins, the long, months-long process of determining whether or not that case can be proven beyond a reasonable doubt.
And that's probably at this point why Petita Laundrie has not been, he's still a person of interest. Because really they don't have probable cause at this point. Because the bottom line of that case, regardless of your belief, is as of right now, nobody saw what happened. On that very moment in time, whatever happened, we still don't know what the heck happened. I mean, did she fall off a cliff hiking and he drug her back, thought she was going to be okay, and passed away?
Right.
Again, we realize that these scenarios are less and less likely as time goes on, but still, we've seen that happen. We've seen that played out where it was wasn't a bad situation at all. Nobody did anything wrong, but in the end, because of fear and the way people acted and did stupid things, it looks like they did something stupid. Like, for instance, if they're out hiking and she fell down and hit her head, and he drug her back and thinking everything's okay, and then she dies, and he's like, they're going to think I killed her because I've been fighting with her the whole time, and he panics and he runs. Again, I understand, but we have to understand, especially as a society, that those things are really important, that we let those things sort of play out, because sometimes, in today's culture, like you were talking about how things have changed, so often we just want to jump to the end, and it's okay if everybody else is guilty, but it's not okay if I'm guilty.
Right.
Yeah, so it's like, I tell my boys, just for instance, like, or young men I know in general, you got to be really careful in today's culture. When I was a young man in the backseat of a car with a girl and I was making out with her and I maybe tried to go to first base and she smacked me in the face, that was the end of it.
Right.
Now it's sexual battery almost, and you're like, wait a minute, and there's no rules and it's really weird. So you got to be really careful how we judge people all the way down this road. I don't know about you, but I have some people I've represented over the years who are now registered sex offenders who have no reason to be on that list. Right. But as a neighborhood, we look it up. Oh, he's a registered sex offender, so he must be the most
offender registry. That could be a whole nother podcast.
Yeah, could be.
Talk about that.
Well, what about when you're pulled over, maybe for speeding or busted tail light, and the police officer wants to search your vehicle and asks if they can search your vehicle?
Well, I would say I would never consent under that kind of circumstance. And I don't mind saying candidly, there's nothing in my car for them to find. But I would not consent to a search, and I would make them, what they have to legally establish is that they have probable cause to believe there's some evidence of criminal activity in your car. But people just, and again, it's that desire to want to please the person in authority. They just say, oh yeah, sure, even though they know there is something in their car. I don't understand why people would ever do that. But I just think the precedent needs to be set. They don't need to be searching your personal belongings. There's nothing in my car right now that I'm embarrassed by, but I wouldn't let anybody search that because it's just nobody's business. It's not the government's business what's in my car.
And so what happens when a crime has happened and the police call you and they say, well, we want to talk to you because we think you're a witness. We don't think you're a suspect. We think you're a witness. Now what do you do as a person who's spoken to the police?
I would say that's another example of where they are legally allowed to deceive you in that regard. That doesn't, just because they tell you they only think you're a witness doesn't mean in the back of their mind they don't also think you might be a suspect. Yep. So, I think you need to be very, very careful. Now, at the same time, nobody likes crime. I don't like crime. I live here. You live here. Nobody likes crime occurring, and we all want to try to cooperate to help crimes not be committed. If you feel you're the victim of a crime, I think you need to talk to the police. That's what you need to do.
Absolutely. And if you're a neighborhood guy and you're part of, be the neighborhood watch. You see a crime, report it. Absolutely. Right. We're not.
Yeah. But that's the nature of being a good citizen. We don't want those things occurring in the neighborhood. So the fact is, we will call the police when that's what the police are for. They're to investigate criminal activity. But if you get the slightest impression during your conversation with the police that all of a sudden this is turning into something where somebody thinks you might have done something wrong, that's when you need to just say, excuse me, officer, I'm not comfortable with this. I would prefer not to speak with you until I've had a chance to talk to an attorney. They will stop at that point. They are legally required to stop at that point. Now, there are some exceptions to that, which we can get into if you want to.
But what if they don't stop? What if
Well,
you say,
okay.
no, I'm going to lawyer up. I mean, pick whatever vernacular you want.
That's good, because that's something that I actually do like to explain to people as often as possible. Once you say, I'm not comfortable speaking with you without an attorney, all that means is nothing you say from that point forward can be used against you. Now, the exception to that is that if they do keep talking to you and you keep answering, which I think is a mistake, but if you keep answering and they've talked to you after you've already invoked your right to an attorney, then the only context where those statements could be used against you is if you get on the stand at a trial 6 months later and you say something that is different from what you told the police. They are then allowed to say, well, now wait a minute, you told the police 6 months ago something completely different from what you're saying now. And that's why you shouldn't be talking, because you don't want to make that prior inconsistent statement.
And it goes around like we were talking
Exactly.
about. You never want to look like you're not telling the truth, because in front of a jury, or in front of a judge, as soon as he believes you're not truthful, and I really do think it's easier to convince a judge that it was a mistake than a jury quite often. But still, as soon as you make that, you open the door to something much greater than any time before that. It's crazy. And a lot of times in those scenarios, like you said, you want to talk, or you think you got it. You think, I didn't do anything wrong, so I'm just going to start running my mouth. And again, you make some inconsistent statement, or you think, we have this propensity to start talking as soon as somebody asks us something. And in that, we hadn't had the time. And this is why it's so important to say, you know what? With all due respect, officer, I'm gonna ask a lawyer before I start talking. That gives you time to at least process. Because a lot of times we just start talking, blah, 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 and we get things wrong, facts wrong when we start talking. But if we have the time I'm gonna go talk to Russ, I'm gonna sit down, walk through it, get my story straight. You're not lying. You're just making sure you're saying
it the right thing.
Saying it the right way. I was not at Johnny's. I was at Jimmy's.
Right.
I wasn't in Hanover. I was in Henrico. I mean, that can be little simple things you say by mistake because you just start talking off the cuff. No, I couldn't have been me. I was in Hanover. You meant Henrico.
Right.
But
then you said it.
Then you said it. You're a liar.
Yeah.
Another common belief is that if you say, no, I've got to go talk to a lawyer, that then maybe you went from a witness they wanted to talk to a suspect, that it absolutely broadcasts your guilt.
And that I really think is a misconception. I mean, people believe that, and on an individual basis, some people might think, oh, he lawyered up, so that means he's guilty. Legally speaking, though, it doesn't mean that. Your silence cannot be used against you. Your asking for an attorney cannot be used against you. I had a jury just yesterday in Henrico County. That's one of the instructions that was given to the judge. That was given to the jury. The judge instructs the jury that the defendant's silence cannot be used against him.
And I think, honestly, that's what's been bothering me about what's going on with Petito. I'm not really commenting on his innocence or guilt. I'm just commenting on the framework in which they're putting people in, and they're saying because he's not talking, because he went away. And remember, from the facts I got, and you guys can correct me, when he left, there was nobody asking him questions. He came home and left pretty quickly.
Right.
So, again, does it look good? No. But the point is, just because he's not saying something, just because his family's not saying something, doesn't paint them as bad people, doesn't paint them any other way than they may be making a very strategic, smart decision. I kind of think of the last few years of politics. If some of these people would have just shut up, a lot of the things that happened probably wouldn't have happened, but we get in this propensity to talk. And we think we're okay. And you never know who you're talking to sometimes, And the other thing that we keep talking about is we tell our clients all the time, don't talk. Then they go to school and they talk to Jimmy and Johnny, their best friends, and they tell the story. And maybe they embellish the story because it's kind of cool. And then all of a sudden they've told two different stories. And again, you look like a liar. So it's really, really imperative when something happens and you're not comfortable with it and this is potentially a problem, zip the lip. And for everybody.
Or they post about it on social media.
Worse. Worse, yeah.
What about when, you know the story, you didn't have any part in the story, and you want to tell the police what really happened. You have nothing to hide. You just want to share with them. You saw this go down, and you have no problem talking to them because you had nothing to do with it.
You, unless you happen to be a lawyer, can't be 100% sure of that. So you think you had absolutely nothing to do with it. You think you've got no liability. You may be right. You might very well be right, but you ought to sit down with somebody that knows the system first, discuss it with them, and confirm that you've got nothing to worry about.
Because, we always say you're your own worst lawyer. And that's so true, because even if you are a lawyer, I mean, quite frankly, if somebody asked me about some crime and thought I was doing it, I would go talk to Russ or somebody right away,
Absolutely,
because
absolutely. I
know that I'm going to see it through my own eyes. And I'm like, I got nothing to hide. And then Russ, I have a conversation with Russ. Well, you did, that kind of looks a little weird. Oh, I never thought about that. That does look a little weird.
Well, and that objectivity is something that's what you're hiring a lawyer for. And sometimes clients don't even like that, When a client tells me a story and I go investigate whatever I can investigate, and I come back and I have to honestly say to them, you know what? They've got a pretty good case against you. Sometimes I get upset about that, but that's my job, is to give them my honest opinion as to what's going to happen if we put this in front of a jury or in front of a judge. And that's unfortunately, that objectivity is what you're paying for, and you want it so that you can make the best decision as to how you go forward.
I think there's the critical issue that we see from a different point of view because we're attorneys. But there are people who are in these scenarios we've talked about today and the fact patterns who simply don't have the resources to talk to an attorney.
Right.
They, for whatever reason, what do you do then? You can't possibly come up with that kind of money.
To some extent, the Constitution helps with that, because if you've actually gotten to the stage of being charged, you have a right to an attorney, and the government will appoint you an attorney. You just need to make sure you exercise those rights. And it's the actual assertion of the rights that sometimes people get uncomfortable with. In a civil context, it is different. Then you might have to be dealing with legal aid or something like that.
But again, it's knowing that you don't have to talk. And even at that beginning stage, knowing that you can't afford an attorney shouldn't start your mouth running. Because again, the best possible thing you can do is stay quiet until such time as you get a court-appointed lawyer, or grandma helps you out, or maybe you don't get any help. But even in that scenario, a lot of times, I would say 99% of the time, you're better off not talking.
Right. And one other thing I always like to remind people of in that context, we fell.
Sorry, we had a little mishap with our gizmo. I wonder if it's because it's low battery. All right, we're back.
No, what I was going to say, another aspect of that, remaining silent means remaining silent. It does not mean getting in the officer's face and telling him that he doesn't have the right to do these things.
Yeah.
Being nasty to the police is never going to help your situation. When I say politely tell them, I want to speak with an attorney, I mean politely tell them that. Yeah. They will respect it. If you say to the police, I am not comfortable speaking with you, I would like to speak with an attorney, but don't do it in a nasty way. You're never going to win that fight.
I said all the time, like I try to tell them, I always tell them with my kids or something, I say with all due respect, I want to,
Yeah.
And that even goes into the school and principals interviewing you, and I know,
That's all right.
kind of being wonky right now, but I tell my kids, like, even if the principal calls in the office, you don't have an obligation to speak.
Right.
Call me and we'll talk about it. I'll come talk to you. You feel the pressure. I remember my son one time in junior high got in some kind of mess and they wanted him to write a statement, and he made me very proud because he said, with all due respect, I'm not going to write a statement. Well, you have to write a statement. He goes, no, I don't. And he just stood his ground, and and he just looked at me and goes, no. He said, but if you want to call my dad, he'll come talk to me, and then maybe I can talk to you, maybe I can't. But at this point, I don't feel comfortable talking, and I'm not going to.
Yeah.
And he just stood his ground. I was like, dude, that's beautiful. And the reason is, quite frankly, in that situation, he had nothing to do with it. But I just really feel like he could have got himself into trouble had he talked, and he didn't.
If he'd said something that he shouldn't say, not unintentionally.
Is there anywhere the police can't talk to you or not permitted to reach you? Work, home, the spa, the golf course? Is there anywhere they're not allowed to try and find you?
Not really. I can't really think of any place that they can't go. I mean, I've had people sitting in hospital beds after being injured in a car accident get interviewed by the police. Now, sometimes that interview, if you're drugged, something of that nature, it might not be as valuable to them, but still, they are allowed to make the attempt.
Absolutely. They'll show up, and remember, their objective sometimes is to make you feel uncomfortable, because the natural, I guess, immunity, or not immunity, the natural antidote to our anxiety sometimes is to start talking.
Right.
So they want you to feel uncomfortable, and they want you to be in that tight position, so you start, I got to get out of this. That's why people get interviewed for 14 hours. It's really not about the 14-hour interview. It's an hour 14. Your defenses start to fall down. You start to you're so anxious. Right. You're so concerned.
Get it over with. Tell them what they want to know.
Tell them what they want to know. And it happened. So many cases where Russ and I and Jackie studied in law school that should have never been, convictions, and the people got convicted. Now, is that a huge percentage? No. But to me, spending one day in jail, it's like our founding fathers. It's better for 99 guilty people to go to get away with it than one person to spend one night in jail. And that's the principle of our Constitution that we stand on.
Exactly.
How difficult is it as the defense attorney in court or otherwise to overcome statements made without an attorney? How does that impact the case in your experience?
It varies from context to context and what the statements are. What the circumstances were where the statements were made. I guess the overarching point, though, is you just don't want to even have to deal with that. It would be so much better. I like the cases where somebody comes to me and I find out after a month of investigating and filing motions that they didn't say a word to the police. I have no statements to deal with. That means when we get to a trial, I can sit down with my client and say, well, this is all their evidence. What do you have to say about it? And that's the only statement that's ever been made, what he says at that point.
And it's really a good thing. And I don't know about you, but I have, again, we're not anti-police or anything like that in the sense of that. But I have a lot of good friends who are police officers. Mm-hmm. My neighbor used to be a detective, and he would tell me all the time. We would talk about a case or something. He said, I would say 85% of my cases couldn't have been solved but for the guy actually speaking about it. And that's a scary number when you think about it. But it goes back to, again, and I hate to beat a dead horse, but this whole Petito case. If he stayed silent this whole time and doesn't talk to the police and his family doesn't get involved and nobody who knows says anything, it's going to be a hard case to win.
Right.
Because you have a person who died in the middle of the woods and nobody around. And you can put all the circumstantial evidence you want around that. They fought at Wendy's and they fought over here and cops got called on her and they had a very violent relationship. Okay. That doesn't mean in that moment, because remember, they have to prove beyond a reasonable doubt there's no other way she could have died, right? So there's reasonable doubt that all kinds of things could have happened. She could have fell, she could have tripped, she could have hurt herself, she could, There's 100 scenarios there that a good defense attorney is going to put in front of the jury and say, look, we don't know what happened, And everybody wants to rush to judgment and close it. And again, if he's guilty, I'm all for it. He needs to go to jail for a long time. But, at the other side of that, if he's innocent and is in the wrong place at the wrong time or made a dumb mistake in a very bad circumstance, that's not worth him losing his liberty.
We hope you've enjoyed this episode of What to Do When. For more episodes, be sure to subscribe to our podcast, and we encourage you to check our archives to listen to previous topics. Tune in next week for a new episode and some fresh perspective from Critzer Cardani.